month of February, talking all about relationships, right? And specifically been talking recently about everybody's favorite topic, dating relationships. And a couple weeks ago, if you were with us, we really started talking about like what is the purpose of relationships? What is the purpose of dating? What is the purpose of marriage? And how do we allow that, to truly impact the way that we, search for that person eventually, whether or not we're in a relationship or not. How do we do that? And we came across just this idea of, the purpose of relationships is to seek God together, right? To seek God on our own, and then when we find that person, be able to seek God together. And we throughout the idea of like running in a race, right? And to look for, as we're running in that race, looking for other people who are also running in the same direction as us. And then last week, we talked all about, within that, this idea of love, right? And how, the word love, it's thrown around all over our culture. But we talked about it, and I gave the example of like those mockbuster movies, right? The movies that they may have a similar title, they may look similar on the cover, but it's very obvious that when you put that in to your DVD player or whatever, that it's not anywhere close to what the actual movie is. And the same is true for any other love outside of God's love, right? We talked about how all other attempts outside of this love of God, called agape love, they're cheap imitations. They just are. And we define that agape love as love without conditions. So we say, hey, it doesn't matter if you're kind to me, if you're mean to me, I'm going to show you that love, and the love that only comes from Jesus Christ. And that's the only way I can expect to show that love is if I get to know who Jesus is. And we talked about, what does love look like? What does agape love look like? And we came to that idea of that unconditional love through that. And so, as we've kind of been looking through all this stuff with relationships, talking about who to look for, how to look for them, how to evaluate, how to do all these things in order to be able to find, when we do find that person, be able to run towards God together, I thought we could kind of finish it out tonight by kind of talking about, now that we know, what we need to pursue, who we need to pursue, and why, I think it's also important as well for each and every one of us to look at how to date well. And so within that, I want to kind of start here and ask you this question. What are, in your context, so say somebody's dating in your high school, your middle school, your high school, what are some unwritten rules of dating that like people just know? They don't necessarily say them, but like this is like truly an unwritten rule that like that's just obvious. Like that's just something that people do who are in relationship. Anybody? What's that? Go on a date. Okay, sure. I'll share one with you that I didn't even realize, and maybe I just was like ignoring my mom because I thought I was better than her, but there was like an unwritten rule that, and I don't know if it's still true today, but like if I'm dating someone or if I'm, in a relationship with have a significant other, as the man, I'm supposed to stand like closest to the street. I don't know if that's something that's like a thing now, but yeah, that was something I didn't realize till I was way too old to. I should have realized it by then, but for some reason I didn't. Anything else that you guys would say? What are some unwritten rules of dating now? Or even people who are in like the talking stage, for example. Like what are some unwritten rules that you just do or don't do? And they can be funny. What? Make them pay. Okay, yeah, sure. The guys pay, all right. Now, girls, do you just go and like order the most expensive thing and say, you got it? Okay, all right, that's fair. Oh, boy. Okay. Guys, I'm curious, what are some unwritten rules of dating that you just kind of have heard or everybody kind of knows? Okay, sure, yeah. That's fair. Don't entertain other people. Yeah. Oh, that's true. That might be true. I know. He said if they answered, they might get attacked or get some dirty looks. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, you guys got to figure this out later. Anyway. Okay, the guy always has to choose. All right, sure. Okay, yeah. Of course. Make sure you get her flowers. Yeah. What? Oh, yeah, that was one of the red flags. Don't choose the other person's food. Don't order for that person because that person might not like their food. Sure, okay. I mean, there's a ton of unwritten rules, right? And honestly, some of them have probably changed since, some of your leaders were in high school, since I was in high school or middle school. They've probably changed a little bit, but there's probably some that also are pretty much the same as well. And the truth is that what makes the dating scene so crazy is that everybody has there's written rules, right? These expectations of another person. Like, for example, the person I date is going to be this, or they're going to be that, or they're going to behave in this way, they're not going to do this. Like, that's the expectation. And for us, as we gather here, I think we need to pause and then ask ourselves how God might want us, if we bring God into the picture, how he might want us to handle the dating scene. Now, God has a lot to say about marriage, about all that stuff, but as we've talked about, God doesn't necessarily have a lot to say, the Bible doesn't have a lot to say about dating, right? Because if you remember, dating wasn't necessarily like a thing like we know it today back in biblical times, right? In fact, the family got a lot more involved. It looked a lot different than, what our typical dating scene looks like today. It just looks different. But within that, since there wasn't a lot of dating back then, you're not going to see a lot of clear biblical commands on how to necessarily navigate or handle dating. But here's the deal. At the same time, there's some pretty obvious guidelines that I think each and every one of us, we can figure out when we look at what Scripture has to say about relationships in general. There's a bunch of different stuff. In fact, you could call these, if we're going back to this idea of unwritten rules, these are God's written rules, right? These are the rules that God puts in place for our benefit. Now, has anybody ever done this before? Has anybody ever been in a mall or something, someplace with an escalator? Everybody ridden an escalator at one point in your life? Yes, me too. Okay, has anybody ever done this? Because I'll admit it. Has anybody ever stepped on an escalator and been like, oh shoot, I shouldn't have stepped here, and you're going to the wrong place and you're like, crap. You can't really go back because there might be if you're in a crowded area, there's a bunch of people. So you kind of just have to go back around and figure out where you're going. I've done that before, at a sports game, for example, and I'm like, oh, that's not actually where my seat is. Oh, shoot. Well, I can't go back now because there's 40 people behind me. It's in the same way, it's not easy to turn around once you started moving. And the same is true in relationships. The same is true because our choices in dating, whether physically, whether emotionally, whether spiritually, they move us in a direction. And once we've gone too far, it can be very hard to backtrack. I was actually talking to a guy today, right before RSM, and he gave this great example. It's kind of like toothpaste, right? He used this example of you can say, if you say, for example, I had a couple of you come up, we had 2 things of toothpaste here, and I said, squeeze out all the toothpaste. And you're like, okay, sure. And I said, okay, now put all the toothpaste back in. It's a little bit harder to do, isn't it? It's not as easy to do that. And the same is true with how we handle dating. Once we've gone too far, it can be very hard to go back and to take things back. That's why I think boundaries in dating, they matter. They're important. Boundaries in dating are a big deal. They protect us from ending up in places that we were never supposed to go, that we were never created to go. Pushing boundaries that we were never created to push in the context of a dating relationship. They matter. They absolutely matter. Now I want to tell you a story. It's a little bit embarrassing, but it's okay. So, when I was a high school student, how many of you drive? Okay, how many of you have your license? You're driving right now. All right, for those of you who aren't, how long do you guys have till you're driving? Legally, 2 weeks. Okay, sure. Yeah, okay, sure. You're driving in some capacity. Yeah, that works. Okay, so this is me. All right, so I'm a high school student. I just got my license probably about within the last year, and I obviously didn't have a lot of money because I worked at a fast food restaurant and I was trying to make money. I didn't really have a lot of money to buy this car, and my parents weren't just going to go buy me a car. And so I got the wonderful privilege of driving a 1997 Chevy Blazer. Let's put that one on the screen. This is not my Blazer, but it looked pretty similar to this. Yeah. Well, I just want to tell you something. This car was pretty much as old as I was at this time, and it was pretty cool, actually. It had a sunroof. It was pretty awesome, man. I thought I was living back in those days. But so I had my old Chevy Blazer. I'm at my friend's house. It's a Sunday night, right? We've just watched football, and it gets really, really foggy out. It starts getting really foggy. I'm talking to the point where school the next day is pretty likely to get canceled. We've had some of those even this year, right, where it's yeah, school's probably going to get canceled. If not, we're at least going to have a delay. And, I remember I was really gung-ho on getting back to my parents. It was about a 20-minute drive from my friend's house to my parents. It's super foggy out, and my parents are like, I don't know if that's a good decision, Cody. And I'm like, yeah, but I really just want to get home. And they're like, I don't know if it's a good decision. And I'm like, I'm going to do it anyway because I'm a high school student. I'm going to do it anyway because I want to get home, and I'll be fine. That's what I said. And they're like, okay, fine, be careful. Against their better judgment, I made my way home, and I was driving and probably going a little bit too fast. And all of a sudden, I realized, oh, shoot, I'm in a ditch. And I completely somehow, you're supposed to turn right. I just didn't even see the turn because it's that foggy out. And I end up almost jumping down into the yard of our school, in our high school. And yeah, my car all of a sudden, it sounded like a hot rod. Something was clearly messed up with it. It was not good. And I remember my front end was really dented, and I just drove off. The police didn't even get involved. So, but there was a pretty good rut there for a while. But anyway, I remember I was called my mom, and I'm like, hey, I think you were right. I had to admit it. I couldn't really hide from that. But I remember then, I made my way home, and it was probably smoking a little bit, and it was very loud. So if I got pulled over, they'd obviously know something wasn't right with my car. And yeah, it took a little bit of time for me to get home, and my car was pretty beat up after that. My beautiful Chevy Blazer was beat up. Pretty much a bummer. But I tell you this story because there was pretty obvious guidelines into what I needed to do and not do. And I said, nah, I got it. I know what I'm doing. I'll drive fine. And then that didn't end up going very well for me. My old Chevy Blazer was smoking, and it was not good at all. Yeah, wasn't good at all. So all that to say, I tell you that funny story because boundaries and guidelines, they're important, right? They protect us from driving into a ditch and destroying your car because you thought, oh, I can navigate this fog. And now they also protect us when it comes to our life, and especially when it comes in the context of dating relationships. So let me ask you this question then. What are some common boundaries? Don't just think dating, think in the world. What are some common boundaries to protect people in everyday life? What are common boundaries today? Anything. Speed limits, sure. Who actually follows speed limits, though? Let's be honest. They're recording this? Oh, thank you. Yeah, I definitely do. Okay, speed limit, sure. What's that? Sure, yeah, absolutely. What? Seat belt, sure, absolutely. Yeah. I know, whenever we had all that snow, travel restrictions for a reason. Don't go out if it's red, even though you might really want to. Anybody else? What are some things? What are some boundaries that people put in place that are good for people, that actually protect people? The mom thing. Okay, sure. Yeah. I'm thinking very high places, when they have guardrails and stuff, that protects people from being dumb and being oh, look at me hanging over the side and falling off. At least it tries to. Sure. Anybody else? What are some other things that you guys know? Maybe even at school. What are some guidelines that protect people? No running in the halls. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many things, right, that are put in place in our context, and even, on your way home. Stoplight, right there, right, for a reason. There's different guidelines in that are not put in place to ruin your fun, but are put in place to protect people in everyday life. And so as we think of this in the context of dating, I want us to go to 2 Samuel. If you have your Bible, let's turn here to 2 Samuel chapter 11, starting in verse 1. 2 Samuel chapter 11, starting in verse 1. It'll also be on the screen for you as well. So, this is what this says in 2 Samuel. This is a story here. It says, in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and with the whole Israelite army, and they destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained in Jerusalem. Little context, David is the king of Israel here. So one evening, David got up from his bed, and he walked around to the roof of the palace. From one roof, he saw a woman bathing. Yikes. Okay. The woman was really beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. And the man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Yikes. Yeah. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, I am pregnant. So yikes, a lot of nopes from David that he does here. Think about it for a second. David is the king of Israel. He is supposed to be at war here in this story. But instead, what does David do? Does he stay? Does he go out to war? No. He stays at home. And one evening he goes up, he sees this woman Bathsheba, and he doesn't look away. He has a choice to make there, to look away, and he doesn't. Instead, he doesn't just not look away, he takes it a step further, and he sends for her, he sleeps with her, and then, sadly, this leads to very devastating consequences that happen here. Now, here's the heartbreaking truth of this story, is David allows his desires here in this story to dictate his actions instead of honoring God. Which begs the question then, okay, what could have David done differently in this story from what he does, where he lets his desires get in the way of what he knows he shouldn't be doing and should be doing? Well, for example, the first thing, he could have gone to war like the king should be doing. He could have done that. That's an easy one, okay, sure. He could have looked away. He could have had accountability from others. And sadly, none of those boundaries are in place, and that leads to some pretty devastating actions that David takes and consequences that happen after this. And I think the same in this story. The story seems a little wild, maybe for some of us, but I think the same can be true for us if we're not careful with boundaries. If we don't set these clear boundaries before, like clearly David doesn't in this story, we might be unprepared for when that decision comes and we have to make choices in our life. We might be unprepared to deal with those. And if we don't have a plan in place, I think we're very much more likely than to compromise. So then what exactly should we have boundaries around? Previously we talked about the purpose of marriage, the purpose of dating, to grow intentionally together as two people seeking God. And I think a healthy relationship then includes three key areas I want to talk about tonight with this growth together: the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. And these three things are incredibly good, but it's important to steward the pace and extent to which we experience them in dating. Because like I said, dating is the evaluation stage. Dating is not the marriage stage. It's the evaluation of that point. So the truth is, when you are married, though, when you do, part of your relationship will be to grow together unhindered without hesitation. But dating's not there yet. You're not there when you're dating. And you can greatly hurt yourself or another person or others if you're not careful, if you don't navigate this well. So I don't think it's always, a conversation that's always handled super well, to be honest with you, in churches. I think, sadly, well-meaning Christians at times can use guilt and shame as tools to try to steer people towards purity. And I don't think that's what God wants. And maybe you've experienced that in your life. Like scare tactics, it feels like, or conversations that leave you feeling embarrassed. Now, on the other hand, it feels like our culture has taken the complete opposite extreme, saying it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't matter what you do with your body as long as it makes you happy. That's what matters. That's what our culture tells us. Do whatever feels good. Yeah, you're good. Follow your heart. Give in to your desires. Do all that stuff. But here's the truth. I think both of these perspectives, on the one side and on the other side, I think both of these perspectives, they missed the mark here. I think they really missed the mark. And they miss what God desires for us in a dating relationship. So, all that to say, let's be real for a second. Like, you are wired to be attracted to other people. You are. That's not a mistake. It's part of the design, right? You were designed like that. And when you like somebody, you want to get to know them better. Yeah, that makes total sense. And when you feel that pull towards a relationship, it's not wrong to want those things. In fact, it's natural. It's what we were created to do. So, while attraction is a good thing, it's a thing from God, it can also be dangerous if it leads us into temptation or if it leads us into sinning. In fact, James says each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. The problem isn't attraction here. I hope you catch this. The problem is when we allow our desires to control us and lead us away what God's best is for our lives. And that's why setting boundaries, like I said earlier, it's not about taking away the fun. It's about helping us to be able to live the best life and the life that God created for each and every one of us. God created it to be good. So in the same way, I think God gives us then the boundaries of relationships because he knows how powerful, right, the intimacy of what a marriage relationship should be. It's powerful. It's a big deal. It is. And he knows that if we just handle it casually or recklessly and we just say, I'm going to do whatever I want to do here, it's going to lead, if we're not careful, to a lot of hurt, to a lot of regret, a lot of brokenness. And God's not doing this because he wants to take away, right, our fun, or he wants to, do all these things so that we can't do anything. No, he does it for our benefit. And that's why I think it's so critical for us just to make sure that we are guarding ourselves in this. Whether we're in a relationship now or whether we're not in a relationship, I think it's just so critical for us to set these boundaries now, and so that we know once we do get into a relationship, we know what we need to be doing. And we know this is why we need to be doing these things, is because we need to be making sure that we are living and experiencing relationship the way that God designed us to experience relationship. And I think just so often, if we're not careful, we can try to almost like get to the edge, right? Like, how far can I push it? And I just think that's not something that we should even be experiencing or we should even be trying to do. No. Because the purpose of dating is to glorify God together, right? And if we want to truly do that, I think we need to do a couple things. Like I said, first, we need to remember that purpose. We got to remember what the purpose is. Culture might just tell us it's all about fun, it's all about status, it's all about avoiding loneliness. But God's design for a relationship, it's bigger than that. It is. It's an evaluation to lead us towards marriage. It's an evaluation. And so then, if it's an evaluation, it makes sense to be intentional about the choices that we make in a relationship. To make boundaries and set those clear boundaries for that reason, for that remembrance of that purpose of dating. And I think second then, it's important to take time and process, what does God's word say? It's easy to follow whatever feels right in the moment, or to just copy what everybody else is doing. But I think wisdom starts by understanding what God says is good and healthy and honoring to him. And then finally, I think whenever you're in a relationship, you're going to have the conversation. You have to have the conversation with the person. You can't just say, okay, I've got my boundaries, you've got your boundaries, because often not, if we don't have that DTR, that define that relationship, if we don't do that, a lot of times we can find ourselves compromising on the boundaries that we want set in stone, right? They can become a little bit more fluid if we're not careful. So we need to make sure that we're having that conversation. Now that we know, okay, these are the things I know I should be doing. These are the boundaries that we need to be setting in place. This is the purpose of our dating relationship. Let's talk about it, and let's define what that looks like. Let's make sure we're on the same page when it comes to that. And honestly, in this time, in this last, DTR and having these conversations, we might even realize that, hey, we don't align in this, and that's a big deal. That's a deal breaker. And I think that's so critical, especially, I want you to hear this, if eventually we say, hey, I like this person, I'm going to get engaged, I'm going to get married, but you're never on the same page when it comes to this kind of stuff, it's going to just come up at some point later on in your life. So it's so critical to catch those things early. All this to say, guys, at the end of the day, boundaries, they're not just about rules, they're about wisdom. They're about wisdom. So are we setting ourselves up to stay far, far from the cliff of, can I just try to do these things? Or, push the boundary? Or do we just say, I don't even want to get to that point, right? I don't want to get to that point. I want to make sure that I'm doing these things that God calls me to do. I remember when Grace and I were dating, that's one thing we made sure, like, hey, we need to make sure that we have accountability. We need to make sure that we figure out these times where we can be honoring God in our relationship. And I'm very grateful that we did that. I really am. And so all to say, I've been there. I've been in all the different stages. And so I understand how difficult it can be, but I also get it, how critical it is to truly set these boundaries, and not just set these boundaries, but truly live our lives in these boundaries, knowing that this is the way that God calls us to be in relationship, to have healthy boundaries. It's so critical. So I think the last thing I want us to do here before we go into our small groups is just take a second and just ask ourselves then, okay, so what are some ways that we can be keeping healthy boundaries in our own dating life? What are ways that we can be doing that? Whether or not you're in a relationship, what are ways that you can be, if you're in one, if you're going to be in one, wherever you sit, what are ways that you can keep healthy boundaries in your own dating life? Because odds are, at some point here in the next couple years, who knows, or longer, I don't know, you're going to be in dating relationships, and you're going to have to make these decisions then. And so my last word of an advice and hope here is that you would see that example of how David did not set good boundaries, and there was consequences that came with that. But we have a choice to not do what David did in this story. We have a choice to learn from his poor example that he set here in order to set those healthy boundaries in our dating lives. So ask yourself that question. What are some ways that you can keep healthy boundaries in your own dating life? Let's pray. God, thank you for first and foremost creating relationships. God, thank you for creating us to be in relationships. And God, as we've just navigated the last couple weeks, just all the stuff with dating, love, relationships, boundaries, all these things, God, sometimes it can feel like we're drinking from a fire hose with just all this different information. Sometimes it can almost feel impossible to fully understand how to navigate things the right way. But God, I pray that this time that we've had just talking about relationships, you've spoken to some of us, God, and you've maybe convicted us in some ways that we need to be convicted. Or you've just given us fresh ideas and a fresh perspective on if we're in a relationship or not, on what we need to be seeking out in relationships as we're in that evaluation stage towards marriage one day. So that, God, whenever we do get to that point where we are in a marriage relationship, that, God, we would have already done a lot of the legwork ahead of time so that we can have long and lasting marriages, God, that will glorify you ultimately. So, God, bless our time in small group now. God, would you be glorified in it all? We love you, Father. Pray all this in your name. Amen. Awesome. You guys are dismissed.